You were talking about your enthusiasm and following those that pushed the limits as far as what was humanly possible in metal. What about punk music and its influence on metal or thrash even, and its influence? I mean, how do you what were your thoughts and encounters with it when you were just starting to see how far people could go?
My first exposure to punk rock and therefore hardcore was there's a station, it's still around, WTUL, two-lane station. Back in the mid-'80s, on Friday night they would have the hardcore show. On Saturday nights they would have the metal show, Generally Hostile. And at the time, Generally Hostile, the metal show on Saturday nights, they were playing everything that was coming out new at the time. So you would hear Fate's Warning, then you would hear Possessed, then you'd hear Celtic Frost, then you'd hear Slayer or Destruction, Megadeth, Hallows Eve. And this was all in. I'm listening, I'm like getting exposed to all this. And then on Friday nights, a hardcore show where they'd play Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, the Minutemen, Flipper, all this, Butthole Surfers. And it didn't really stick with me at the time. My real, I guess, going in with the punk rock thing was a friend of mine my senior year in high school. He bought me up for my birthday a Bad Brains, the first Bad Brains cassette, the one, the ROIR cassette, the yellow cassette. And I was like, oh my Lord, I was like, this is incredible. And then I think right after that, the Ramones followed. I bought a couple of their albums. And it just kind of went from there. Then it went to like Agnostic Front. And then it went to like Final Conflict, a band from California, then Cro-Mags. And then some years later, I happened to cross, even though they came out in '84, I didn't know who they were at the time, a band from Boston called Siege. And I got their cassette, Drop Dead. And that to me, when I heard it, I was like, whoa. I was like, this was really extreme, more extreme than for because it was hardcore, but it was very extreme hardcore punk. And so Siege really blew me away with that, especially for the time it came out in '84. Since then, I've come to appreciate some of the later Black Flag stuff, like when Henry joined, like Process of Weeding Out, Slip It In, My War. I've come to really appreciate that. And if I do listen to any punk or hardcore, either it's going to be like Ramones, or it's going to be Bad Brains, or it's going to be Agnostic Front, things of that nature. And you're right, hardcore punk, without hardcore punk, you wouldn't have thrash.
Right. I guess that's kind of where I was leading up to. Obviously, you had a deep appreciation for it, watching it progress throughout the years. In what you were composing, how did it influence you? Or did it really?
It did to an extent, especially in my formative years of learning guitar and trying to record stuff. The tempos did, and some of the chord progressions did. Like, it definitely did to an extent. But mainly, especially during my time of playing guitar, what really I honed in on were the shredders, quote unquote, because at the time you had Shrapnel Records, and they had, Paul Gilbert, Jason Becker, Tony McAlpine. They had all the up and coming, the shredders. Yngwie, to an extent, he wasn't on Shrapnel, but he was a name. A few years later, I'd heard Steve Vai, and so that had really made a big impression on me. So then I set out to try and learn how to play like that, like the arpeggios and the sweep arpeggios and the fast scales. And I got fairly proficient with it. And then just some years later, I guess I got bored, kind of burned out of it, and then I went to the bass. Which I can do that stuff on bass, but there's something about playing bass that I find to be very sublime and just very satisfying, mainly because playing the bass, you have a lot more control over the music than most people think you would. What I mean by that is, if the guitar is playing a certain rhythmic figure, the bass can play something along with it. But I'll give you a real life example. When I played in The Void, we had a song where the guitars were holding out chords like da da, and underneath it you had the kicks going do 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 do. So I would play an eighth note bass line to it, like a do 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 to propel it. But when the guitarist was switching the chords, I would stay on the same note I was playing. And what's interesting is that all the other bass players who played in The Void after me, they never played it like I played it. They switched the root note with the guitars. Whereas, let's say the chord the guitarist was playing was E, I would play E, but then say they went to C or C sharp, I would stay on E. What that does is it creates tension against the chord until you finally decide to resolve it. So after they played, they went through like 4 chord changes. Then when they'd launch into the main riff, I would join them back on the main riff.
Gotcha.
And that's actually that's a Paul McCartney technique.
No shit.
Yeah, and he even said that in interviews, like the bass you can control, where the song goes, you can control the key. And even though I wasn't necessarily thinking Paul McCartney when I played that part, that I found out after the fact, he does the same thing. And also rhythmic variations as well. So, if the guitar's holding out a chord for 4 beats or playing a note for 4 beats, I can do that, or I can play 8 eighth notes, or I can play 2 half notes. I mean, it's almost infinite, the rhythmic possibilities with the bass in conjunction with the drums that you can do that can give life to a song.
Sure. Playing guitar, whether it was playing guitar or playing bass, at the time, was it kind of causing you to dissect the songs that you would hear, dissect that instrument's part in those songs down to what they were doing technically?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, if you talk to a bassist or a guitarist or anybody, the instrument they play, they feel like it's the most pronounced part of the song that they hear. Not that it stands out for everyone, but it stands out for them, and they more take notice of that instrument's parts in that song, I guess, because of its relevance, and their ears are kind of tuned to that already, But you seem to kind of cozy up to the technical aspects of the instrument, so that's why I asked, when you were, let's just pick bass, by the time you were playing bass, were you hearing these songs in a different way, or would you listen to it with the ear of a fan and then listen to it with the ear of a bassist?
In the beginning, it was with the ear of a fan, although being a musician, the bass parts would, I'd take notice of them, although not as much as the song overall. When I became a bassist, then I went back and re-listened and really analyzed, and I was like, oh, there is quite a bit going on here. Mainly the 2 bands in general like that I did that with were Atheist and Rush, because I was a fan, or I listened to the songs, digging on the songs, being aware of the musicianship. But once I got with the bass, and I went back and listened to that and really started dissecting it, especially the bass lines played by the bass players for the respective bands.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. I was like, okay, there's more going on here than what I originally thought was. And so it was a matter of dissecting and saying to myself, why does, say, Geddy Lee play this particular run of notes or this line against what Alex Lifeson is playing on the guitar? Or why an Atheist, why is Tony Choi playing, why is he choosing these notes or playing this type of figure against what Randy or Kelly were playing on the guitar? Why is he doing this? And so as a result, analyzing that and breaking it down, it definitely had an influence on me to realize that, there'll be times a lot where I will go with the guitar because you want to lock in, but then there are times you don't just want to follow the guitar all the way through.
Sure.
You want to break off, do your own thing, do something different, but at the same time, not ruining the song. I'll give you an example. Queen song, You're My Best Friend.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I listened to that song as a fan for years. I used to hear it on the radio growing up in the car. It's talking about with my mom, in the 70s. And then when I started playing, get into bass, listening to John Deacon, the bassist, listening to his bass lines, I was like, whoa. I was like, all right, this dude's not just, he's just not playing root 5 octave. He's not just winging it. Like the song You're My Best Friend, to me, is a good example, because if you listen to that song, the bass is doing anything but just playing root notes. He's all over the place. He's doing triplets. He's walking bass lines. It's a very busy bass line. However, you don't, when you hear the song, you don't say to yourself, wow, listen to that bass line. You don't. You're like, man,
Yeah.
it's a really great song. It's a great melody. And to me, that is like someone I would call a bass master, where you can make the line busy, you can make it move, but at the same time, it doesn't detract from the overall structure of the song, and it doesn't stomp all over the other instruments. It's there, but it doesn't stand out so much that at the expense of the other instruments. And that's a good example of that. To me, I would dare say that to me, that is a lot harder than doing two-hand tapping or arpeggios or fast scales. I mean, because that's technique, that's muscle memory, that's, things you can learn, like exercises. But to play to lay down a bass line that supports the song, that can move around, that can be busy, but at the same time not so much that it's distracting. I mean, to me, putting the right note in the right place, the right time, that to me is much, much harder than doing a lot of fast, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess as far as who would I pick for that style of playing, for me it would be like Paul McCartney, John Entwistle, John Paul Jones, John Deacon, Queen. Another guy, he's lesser known, but to me he's up there with those guys, is Stephen McDonald, who's the bass player for Red Cross and also the bassist for the Melvins as well. He's from that school, that real tasteful bass playing, like every note's where it should be. He plays octaves where they're needed. He doesn't play anything that doesn't need to be there. Everything is placed perfectly and it serves the song.
Sure. I think you put it well earlier when you called it sublime, whereas it's understating, but it's still a driving force.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
And
totally.
that definitely takes taste more so than methodology, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it does. I mean, again, but even then, the bass players who are like really technical, or I'll give you an example, Billy Sheehan. He's known for doing his two-handed tap and his insane bass theatrics. But I saw him with the Winery Dogs recently at House of Blues, and if you listen to his playing with David Lee Roth, man, he's a solid. He comes from the clubs, playing in Buffalo, New York. He, playing straight ahead, straight bass lines. He can do that.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys. He can sit there and listen to the David Lee Roth album, Eat 'Em and Smile. They have a song on there, I'm Easy, and he's just do 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 do. He's walking, just a standard bass line, but he can do that because he learned to walk or crawl before he ran.
Sure.
So I mean, he can do that. Same with me. People like, they see my Instagram videos and they're like, oh, look at this, like, wow. And it's like, it's cool and all, but I'm having just as much fun, playing a blues line or jazz line at an open mic somewhere, just kicking back and not having to worry about being at the forefront or, hey, watch what I can do. It's like, no, man, it's like I just want to kick back, hang with the drummer, and support everyone else,